Well, in part 2 we're going to show you how we went about shaping the headstock and cutting the spare wood we'd added. So you'll get to see how we did that and what tools we used to do that. Another reason that I liked the SG as the initial tester for this is the fact that it's got a gloss finish on the back of the headstock and neck, so it'll be easier to match than it will the satin or the matte finish that's on the back of the Les Paul neck, because you can't, whereas with this you can spray clear and then leave it to dry and you can wet sand it and then buff it to get a shine. You don't have that luxury with either satin or matte. It pretty well has to be a final spray finish for it to retain the matte, because you'll find that if you've got a matte finish and you rub against it, you'll start to buff it up anyway in due course, and the back of the neck here where it's been played has started to go more glossy over time. But anyway, with this it'll be a good tester to see how we get on to match the finish and make it look, whilst we don't expect it to be invisible, we just don't want your eye to be drawn to it straight away. So hang around. Oh, if you like what we're doing, thumbs up, or subscribe please, it means a lot to us, it spurs us on to carry on with the videos. And hang around and we'll show you how we got on and what we did. Now comes the time to pluck up the courage and start cutting. What I thought I'll do, I'll cut away from here so that I'm not in a risk of the saw coming back onto the already good part of the headstock. So trying to keep the saw parallel and cutting outside of the pencil line. Taking it nice and slow, there's no rush. And what I'm going to do, just flip the guitar over and see where the saw cut's looking at on the other side. What you find is that the sawdust builds up in front of the blade, so a little blow just to keep your cutting line nice and clean. As they say, the first cut is the deepest. Now as you can see, I've cut and I'm just outside the pencil line. Coming down to the pencil line will be done using sandpaper on a sanding block. So that's cut number 1 done, so I'll do the same here, come back down that side. What I will do is just cut down the edge of the masking tape following the neckline, just to give me a definitive start point, so I've got a bit of an eye on where we are there. So tear that off. That's a good thing with using a scalpel. They're just so, when they're new, they're just so sharp that, you know, cutting away, it's very easy. I was planning on cutting this way, which I might be able to do. My problem is the back of the fret saw's catching the neck, so I can't get the angle I want on it. And what I don't want to do is obviously come in, so I might have to cut that way. So I shall reposition again. So I've decided for safety now I'm going to cut this way, because I was worried that I wouldn't be able to get the angle I needed to keep away from the neck. So, first of all, I'm going to have to cut through some of the waste. Now what I would say is, if you aren't used to using things like the fret saw, practice on some scrap wood. You know, I know if you are thinking of doing something similar, we all want to get stuck into it and do it, but you're much better practicing on some scrap than you are damaging your guitar because you're a bit too hasty. Right, so now I've got access to that line there. The line's actually quite hard to see in the bright light. Right. Hopefully that's made it a bit easier, so just turn that round. As you want to do, cut to the waist edge, so you're cutting, don't try and cut on the pencil line unless you're really experienced. You want to be cutting the far side or the waist side of it. And what I will do is just double check the back, make sure I'm not undercutting that, which I'm not. Again, just every few strokes blow away the wood dust so that you're seeing your pencil line that you're aiming for. And the other thing that's, you know, I'm talking like you maybe haven't done a huge amount of woodwork, is when you get near the end of a cut, you want to be supporting the waist, because that's when you're liable to split and get. So I'm now holding that, and the last few cuts, take the pressure right off and just gradually work your way through. There you go. There you go, can you see that? So that's starting to look like what we want, in my opinion. Now it's time to repeat the process on the other side. I've moved the guitar around to try and give you a bit of a better look at it. Again, cutting away from the top of the headstock to give me a chance of not actually So I'm now just going to flip it over and check I'm outside of the pencil line on the back, which I am. So Carry on. Again, a few strokes, blow, just to clear the debris. Taking your time. Now with any tool, the tool should do the work. When you start forcing a tool, that's when you're A, likely to mess your job up, and B, likely to break the tool. If the tool's working properly, if it's sharp enough, and something like this, you buy a pack of X amount of blades, 12 I think in a pack. You know, if you start thinking they're getting a bit dull, just bin it and put another one on. There's obviously, it's too fine to even think about resharpening. So that's, tilt that over. That's the first cut done on outside the pencil line. So I'll flip that round and then I'll come across here and cut down there. What I've done, I've moved the camera in a bit, and I think what I'm going to do is finish that cut off, so cut right across there now. I don't need to be so careful now because that's cutting the waste. So if I cut to that edge gently, and it'll obviously give you a bit, if you've not seen one before, look at the coping saw. Now interestingly on these, the blade is tensioned purely by the stretch on the handle. The handle, when you take the blade out, it wants to spring open. So the fact of closing it up purely to put the blade in, it is all the tension the blade needs. Because being that thin and that fine, if you put too much tension on it, it's obviously going to want to just break. And you can see, you know, you get a fine cut. These are ideal if you're into craft or anything. If you wanted to make a jigsaw, if you had a picture or something, you could glue onto a piece of thin plywood and then draw this traditional sort of jigsaw shape on it and then cut it out. It's something I used to do for the children when they were younger. I'd make a jigsaw maybe of them, so they'd start assembling a jigsaw and realise it was them on there. So now outside of the pencil mark, and I'm looking to make sure my cut's pretty parallel, and what I'll do, that's gone through both sides now, I'll just double check. Stop. Starting to get to the other side. There we go, and we're through. So you can see that if that's focused up, but at least we're starting to get, now it needs obviously final shaping, but we're starting to get the Gibson classic open book stroke dovewing headstock. Now, having got that far with it, I think the next thing I'm going to do, and I've got one eye on the clouds because it's looking like there is potential for rain, which is the last thing I need at the moment. I think I will get some scrap wood and make up some slightly convex sanding blocks. So I need a fairly gentle one here, and then I'll affix some sandpaper on them with double-sided tape. I've used carpet tape, double-sided carpet tape, and found that to be quite good for that because it is peelable. Some of the double-sided tapes are quite aggressive with the adhesive, so that you put them on great, but when you want to change the paper, it's on there too tight and it just tears and makes a terrible mess. But I've found double-sided carpet tape to be quite good, because it will give up its hold. So that's, I think, what I'm going to do next. Just then I can start sanding, and I think that this edge here needs sanding with a coarse sandpaper. There's not enough there personally to worry about trying to cut anything. I think you'd make the job harder by cutting it. Well, what I've done, I've cut my first sanding block using a piece of old scrap wood. What I did was I drew along the edge of that, and I've cut roughly to the shape of the template I've been using. So it means that in theory, once I'm roughly to the right shape, that will just rock round there to ensure an even finish. I've made it from a thicker piece of wood than the headstock, so that it means there's more surface area for the sandpaper to adhere to. Plus it means that I can visually make sure I'm keeping it at 90 degrees to the face of the headstock. I think the first thing I'm going to do, because as I'm doing this video, I'm kind of thinking on my feet and working out how I'm going to do it with the finer details. This is the double-sided tape I've used with success previously, and it's called Mammoth tape, Mammoth Tasks Everbuild. Now I'll probably find this time it'll stick like the proverbial and I'll never get it off again, but in the past it has worked well. And what I'm going to start with is 120 grit, which is reasonably coarse, but in woodworking it's not really coarse. But I want to use that just to start and see. If I find it's too aggressive, not aggressive enough, I can easily change it over to a finer grade. But the first thing I'm going to do is I've just thought I'm going to just cut round the masking tape so that the edges, I can see easily the edges of the wood, and I'm not getting tape, paper and glue off the back of the masking tape on the headstock, on the sandpaper. So it just gives me a good indication of where I actually am on the guitar. Due to the nature of this project, I'm going to shoot this video certainly over a couple of parts, and where I intend to get up to on this would be, it'd be nice to have the headstock shaped, but the next step, once that's done and all the sanding done, would be to seal the grain on the mahogany, because mahogany is a porous wood and it needs a grain filler in it to stop the finish sinking back into the pores of the wood and leaving you with an uneven finish when you come to apply colour and your clear coat. And I don't have any of that, so I've got to order that in. The silly thing is I'm only going to need a little bit for the areas that I've exposed, but it's got to be done to try and do the job properly. So that's now cut back, so I've got a good view of the side of the headstock, and I shall affix the sandpaper onto my sanding block with double-sided. I bought just a roll of 120 grit paper. It's a cheaper way of buying it, plus it'll fit my random orbital sander at some point if I wanted to do that. But it's a cheaper way of getting more sandpaper than buying it in sheet form, and whatever I'd done, I'd been cutting it down to do certain things with it, so it's kind of a win-win situation really. So as I say, I've got some old scissors that I'll cut the paper with, and I've got an old Stanley type knife that I'll cut anything with that I need, because I don't want to destroy the edge of my scalpel. So the sandpaper is now on with the double-sided tape, and it's time I move the neck round a bit, make sure you see that, and time to start sanding. headstock and the pencil line up a little bit. When you're doing something like this, just take it slowly, there's no rush. Just keep your eye on your pencil marks. You can see that I'm gradually getting there from the dust on me. Just double checking all the time. I'm pretty well there, a bit low in the middle there, so I need to take a bit more off up here because that's down to the line there, but I think that just want to get it so that all the finish off the sides gone and there's just a little bit there. Now, very nearly down where I need to be. Just got a little bit more finish there to come off. So, and the other thing that's good is the fact that we're doing so little material removal that we know that it's going to have absolutely no effect on the integrity of the headstock, and they tend to snap here anyway if they're going to go. And to be fair, the Epiphones are a bit better for that than the Les Pauls because of the way they make their headstock joints. They tend to use either a scarf joint or 2 pieces, 3 pieces of wood for the neck, where the Les Pauls tend to be one. So you've got straight grain running here and it's very weak, thin point, and it's routed away for the truss rod. So, you know, first time that gets a good clout, there's every danger you're repairing a headstock. What I might do is call that done for that side for the moment, and then just do any, I don't know if you can see if I tilt that slightly, that's following the profile pretty good. And when you lay the profile block down there now, look, that's, you see that? That's pretty good. So, in there, that's where we are at the moment. So what I might do while I'm working on this is tackle the other side and get that about right. I've decided to change the sandpaper to put fresh on for this side now, for the new side. And I just thought I'd show you. See, that's peeling off, look. So that's come off. There's a little tiny bit of residue, but absolutely nothing worth worrying about. So I'll repeat the process, some more of the Mammoth double-sided tape, and then cut another strip of sandpaper. So I'm starting with a nice fresh abrasive again. So there you go, some fresh sandpaper and double-sided tape on there, and start the process again.
I'm just going to
So what I'm doing on this side, I'm taking the wood off from down nearer the nut to start with, just so I can get the sanding block more into the shape. Again, just taking your time. The funny thing is that obviously with a guitar that you love, and I'm not saying I don't love this, I want it to be right, you're worried about damaging it and marking it, and it's quite a bizarre thing to take sandpaper to a perfectly good finish and start removing it. Obviously it's not for a trained luthier, but for your average meddler like myself, it is. And the good thing is using this block as I've used it with care. If it fits the profile that way, then it should fit the profile that way there, and they should be symmetrical, providing you don't go too far in one way. And you know, you've got the peg head holes here to use as a bit of guide for you. As I was saying to my friend Kevin when we were starting this project, the good thing with this is, if it goes well, the guitar's now got a bit of a story behind it, a bit of history, and it'll, for me, be remembered as the guitar that I did the video about and worked with my friend on, which is always nice. I think, and as you can see, it's not taken that long to achieve, or to start achieving. The top's going to be more fiddly because it's a smaller area to sand. Now I've switched angles, so I'm hoping you can see. Now I've got to work on the end of the headstock, and what I've done, I've made another little sanding block out of a bit of scrap, and this time the curve is pretty much, if you look, the same, if not a little bit steeper than the end flute. So in theory, if I just gently, now this is going to be more fiddly because it's a smaller piece of area to hit. Now this time you've got to be a little bit more careful because you're working with end grain, and end grain will split more, so there's more chance, if you're not careful with it, that you could split it. It starts splitting out on the back and undo all your hard work. So take it slowly. It's more about getting it right than getting it quick. Now, as I've been pondering this as I've been doing the video, and what I think I'm going to do is, I've sanded to 120 grit, and the final sand, which would be 320 grit, is as fine as you'd want it to take finish, because you want, whilst you want it smooth, you want a bit of a scuff mark, for want of a better word, on the surface for the finishes to grip into. So I think what I'll do is I will do the final finish once I've got the materials I need to do it. So that would mean then that I'm not leaving it exposed, because obviously when you apply finish to things, whether it's wood, metal, anything, you want it clean and grease free to get good adhesion. So I think the best thing I can do is get it roughly to shape, and then give it a gentle sand with, say, 320 prior to the final application of grain filler and any other finishes. And as I mentioned earlier, I haven't actually got those yet, they've not been ordered. And I think another thing I've thought what I'll do is, once I've got the shape right here on the other side, I'll take the masking tape off, and I might just drop in roughly the tuners and just see whether I think I want to do anything with the heel here, or whether I'm prepared to leave that. As I say, I think sometimes projects like this, unless you're doing it for a living or doing it constantly, they kind of evolve, and you take a view on them as they are evolving. Because as I say, on the face of it, I've got an awful lot less work on shaping the headstock to get it aesthetically pleasing as I thought. I thought I would be cutting quite a lot off the headstock, but early signs are that's not necessarily to get a nicer look to the Epiphone headstock, or a nicer look in my opinion. Let's start on the other side now. You can see that's where we're up to. We're getting there now, a little bit more. I've just changed the sandpaper over on the sanding block, and the old bit and tape came off as I'd hoped, so it's living up to its expectations at the moment. So yeah, it's just a case of being patient, taking it your time. I mean, to be honest, if I wasn't filming this for YouTube, I would be sitting here and I'd have the radio on. I'll be listening to Planet Rock probably, and just gradually chilling away. But obviously if I'd done that whilst I'm filming the video, I'd probably get into trouble for various copyright infringements, so consequently I'm having to listen to the wind and the occasional aeroplane and car. Well, after a bit more sanding, if I lay, I don't know if you can see, but if I lay the template on top, that's pretty good. That's close enough for rock and roll, as we'd say. All I've got to do now is just level these down to the face of the headstock, front and back. So I shall proceed now to take, as I say, this needs final sanding, which is going to be with a 320. I don't know at the moment what I'm going to do here. I mean, I think that'll be the devil's own job to try and get all that finish right out of that crevice. Maybe with a file I could do it, but I'll see. I'll decide what I'm going to do, or I blend it from here, just rough the finish up and just blend it back in. As I say, the edges are all sanded so that they're going to be all uniform in colour, even if they're not quite 100% matched to that. So I'll unmask the front and back, and I will then just gently sand these fronts with a block. But what I might do with that is hit that with the 320, because there's only a very little bit there and I don't want to go mad and start marking this. What I'm going to have to do, I'm going to have to rough this up with 320, which will make it look like I've made a right mess of it, but that should only be the lacquer that I'm roughing up, in order to give a good key for when I put a new coat of clear on it after the corners have been sprayed black. As I mentioned earlier, this painter's masking tape, it's A, pretty good, and B, it's easy to get off. So as you can see, if I can flip that like that, so you can see that there isn't any residue on there that's come straight off. Trying to make sure we're on camera. Also now I'll start to get an idea as to if I'm happy with the shape. There's the back of the headstock. I trust that's on camera. Now the next job is to take the front and back down so they're level with the face and the back of the headstock. What I've done, I've made another sanding block, but this has only got I don't know if you can see that, 320 on it, and I've left the middle blank just to prevent any more risk of damaging stuff I don't want to damage. As I mentioned, this will be flatted with 320, probably wet, very damp, just to get a good key. But I don't want to damp this now because obviously we've got exposed grain there. There is a chip there on the headstock which was already on the guitar when I got it, and there's one there. But what I'll do, I'll probably, because I'm going to just take the edges very sharp at the moment. And I think it would have been very slightly rolled, so I'm hoping that a little radius on there will just take that edge and tidy that edge up. I mean, to be honest, I wasn't worried about a few chips and dings. That's all part of beauty of an older guitar. So that's the front taken down. I mean, obviously I will put a little bit of yeah, there is a couple of chips there. That white in there is either damaged finish or just a bit of the sanding dust. So I shall flip her over. You probably now won't be able to see that because of the angle, but what I'm doing now, and don't worry about these scuffs in the lacquer, that'll finish out, and I'm going to have to do some red anyway. I'm just making sure that I'm not rounding any of the edges over I don't want. For example, going like that, I'm trying to keep it as flat as possible to get, I don't know if you can see, to retain crisp edges. As I say, I will round them very slightly because it'll make it a little bit more chip resistant, and I think that's the way that Gibson and Epiphone were done anyway. There's something a bit liberating after once you've taken that plunge to do the job. The fact that whatever happens, you've decided you're going to do it and you've started it. It's a bit like if you work on car bodywork and you might have a fairly good panel that you have to cut some rust out of. Plunging an angle grinder into it to start with takes a leap of faith. The old saying, you can't make an omelette without breaking eggs, is definitely very, very true. And the good thing with this is the fact that the front, which is the bit you're going to see the most, should be the easiest to match up. Now I'm just going to take a bit of the 320 and rub it up the edge just to take the sharp edge off, to round it very slightly, and in doing so make it less susceptible to being chipped. also it's how they would have been. Now the same on the back, just take the sharp edge and just slightly roll it. What I've done now, I've just put the truss rod cover on loosely, dropped the tuners in just so I can have a look and see how I think it's looking, and I've just put a little bit of black tape over the edges just so that the eye is not being deceived, so I can just make sure optically I'm happy with the way the headstock's turned out. Try and get that in shot now. I don't know if you can see that, but I'm pretty pleased with the way that's turned out. It's obviously now time to be finished off. I've managed to keep the serial number, which was important to me, and obviously the Epiphone logo and the crown or pineapple logo there. Whilst these look scuffed, that's just light sanding marks in the clear coat, and I'll have to scuff this up anyway, so that will all disappear in due course of time when I start finishing it. Well, I think that's a good place to conclude part 2. We have the headstock cut to shape now and sanded. We just need to finish it. I've ordered some Heritage Cherry lacquer, and I've ordered some black paint for the front of the headstock, and I've ordered some grain filler, because with mahogany you need to fill the grain because it's a porous wood, and if you don't, I think the surface will end up undulating following the grain and it won't look very nice, so it needs to be sealed to stop the paint being drawn into the wood grain. So we'll see you again soon in the Room of Rock, and we'll see how we get on when we have a go at finishing the guitar.